Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 13 of the Pawsey Capital Refresh podcast, where today we're going to talk about Pawsey's migration and training process as we onboard our researchers onto phase 1 of Setonix. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet on today, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. I would also like to extend my respects to the elders on the lands on which you are on today, where you're listening to this podcast. And I would like to pay my respects to those elders, past, present, and emerging as well. So, as I mentioned, this podcast is all about migration and training at Pawsey as we get onto phase 1 of Setonix. The first phase of Setonix is now in acceptance testing at Pawsey, meaning in the first few weeks of April, the centre is preparing this system for researchers. This preparation includes Pawsey staff really understanding the system, preparing documentation, migration training, and other training so that we can onboard our researchers as best as possible. In the final months of 2021, Pawsey made the call to researchers to apply for supercomputing time on Setonix Phase 1 for 2022. So with over 120 projects ready for Setonix, I would like to introduce my guests for today so that we can talk about the migration onto the new system, as well as the training that we have on offer so that our researchers are best prepared for this process. So as always, I have Stacey Tyson with me, Pawsey's Capital Refresh Project Manager. Hello, Stacey.
Hello, Aditi.
I also have Anne Buckhouse with me, Pawsey's Education and Training Manager. Hi, Anne.
Hi, Aditi.
And Chris Harris, our Senior Supercomputing Application Specialist, who's looking after the migration. Hey, Chris.
Hello.
Hello. So these are our special guests today and a couple of new voices, as I promised in our last podcast. I think I might kick off with a question for you, Chris. Can we start talking about the migration and what exactly is involved in the migration process?
Definitely. So I think, as you mentioned, we're looking at setting up the system ready for researchers in April, which means we're currently expecting the first research projects to get started on the system in May. And to spread the support load, we're planning to stagger the projects across the first 6 weeks of getting up and running on Statonix. And to maximize the potential usage of the new system, we'll be starting with the larger merit allocations first, just to try and use up as much of that available capacity as possible as soon as possible. In terms of the actual migration itself, what existing users of Magnus Galaxy and Zeus can expect is they'll need to be moving their computational workflows from those systems onto the first phase of the new Setonix system. And while not every research project is the same, I guess there's some certain activities that all of them will probably be engaging in. So I think probably the first thing projects will do will be to log into the new system, which will be very similar to how they log into our existing supercomputing systems. The main difference being it'll have a new hostname, setonix.pawsey.org.au. And once they're on the system, I think one of the first things that most projects will do will be to look at moving their files from the existing systems onto Setonix. So Setonix has some new file systems that come with them. For some of these, they have the same name. So it could potentially be a little confusing where you look at your home directory and previously all of your home directories were all the same place on all the other systems, but there's actually a new one. So you won't find your existing files there and you'll have to kind of transfer them across. And that's the same for the new Scratch file system. And we also have a new software file system, which is where users can install their software. And that probably leads well into the next thing that users might want to think about once they've got their files across, is to look at the new software stack on the system. There's updated versions of a lot of the modules that both HPE and Pawsey provide. And it's just really critical because the architecture is different to reinstall software. So if groups have been managing their own software installations, reinstalling their software from scratch is an important thing that they'll want to be looking at. And I think the other main activity would be then to update workloads for Setonix. So looking at the Slurm batch scripts, we have some minor changes around partition names. The configurations of nodes are slightly different. The new Setonix nodes have 128 cores and a lot more memory than the previous systems, and so there might be some changes to job scripts that need to take place. And at that point, hopefully, having sort of carried out these different activities, projects should be in a good place to start using the system, submitting jobs and running.
That's cool. So we're now talking like we've been talking about this for a few years now, ever since this capital refresh project started. But now we're actually talking about get on the system, start using it, start logging your jobs, which is really, really exciting. But in that, it sounds like you've named a few changes that our users can expect. Any documentation around this that they can follow so that they're confident in these changes and what they're doing?
Yeah, definitely. So we've actually taken the opportunity with the new system to do a fairly extensive update of our existing supercomputing documentation. We've had some guidance from an experienced technical writing specialist, which has been fantastic, and we've tried to follow some of the best practices for technical writing. And so what our users will be able to see is some updated supercomputing documentation pages that cover off the general supercomputing concepts. And we also have a system-specific Setonix user guide that contains a lot of the Setonix-specific information. And we've also put together a Setonix migration guide, which is to help guide researchers specifically through the processes of migrating.
How long would researchers expect their migration to take?
It will really depend on the research group and the kind of work they're carrying out. It could be quite quick. We find that different research projects will have, I guess, different levels of complexity in all those areas. Like some groups will have a very data-intensive workflow that has a lot of data, and so moving the data across might be a fairly significant and in-depth activity. Whereas other groups, that might be sort of a couple of files with some initial parameters, and that's all they really need to sort of take to the new system. Likewise, some groups will have workflows that consist of a few job scripts, whereas others will have much more in-depth sort of workflows with workflow managers that need to be set up. And so I really think every project is different, and will have different areas of the migration that they'll need to focus on.
Cool. Okay, and I guess that's why it's also really important that once they do get that access, they do start their migration process straight away rather than leaving it to the last minute, especially because we've got that staggered approach over the 6-week migration period as well. Yeah, cool. So on that note, that's a lot of information that we've just covered, and it's a lot of new information as well for our researchers. So as they go through this process, what level of support can they expect from Pawsey?
So thanks, Aditi. And so following on Chris's discussion of the changes coming, the training follows that same type of cadence, right? So we talk about, we've got 6 modules, and they cover the highlights of what is changing and what projects and need to know. They talk about file systems. They talk about using modules and containers. It talks about the software stack, installing and maintaining software. Another training module talks about submitting and monitoring jobs and any changes there with the Slurm batch scripting. And then we also talk about the data area that Chris mentioned as well. So using data throughout the data lifecycle and the project lifecycle. There'll be multiple offerings of these 6 modules. So we talked about a staggered approach to onboarding projects and having them go through migration. Likewise, we'll be having training offered weekly so that individuals can join and attend a live online session. However, if that timing doesn't work for them, we'll also have the sessions recorded so that they can have a look either before or after, or they can complement that and dig in deeper after they go to a live session and have a closer look at the material that we'll be covering. We'll have weekly Q&A sessions so that if you're on and you have questions that have come up with your migration or with the training or just something about your migration in general, you can come to the Q&A sessions. And and then we'll answer your questions there as well. Something that we're trying to do is we're trying to kind of weave a path, right, and a support for projects who are migrating, so that the training is really the what and the why. What's going to be changing? Why is it changing? How is that going to impact me? And then how do I do it step by step? You can go to the documentation, and there will be links within the training that will guide you specifically into documentation areas so that you can follow more step by step, and the migration manual, the user guide that Chris was talking about as well. That is all meant to help people understand first what is changing, and then how to actually make those changes and apply it within their projects. And then the surrounding support all around that throughout the entire process, through the help desk, through the Q&As, etc.
And on that, on these training sessions, I believe they're going to be recorded and provided online as well to the researchers. How soon will they be made available?
So as soon as migration starts, there will be training sessions held. And but we plan and hope to have the first module, which is an introduction to Setonix. So kind of an overview, ready to go before, so you get that sneak peek into what's coming around the corner. So to make it easier for individuals to go back and forth between the training and the documentation, there will be links on both sides. So documentation will be linking back to the playlist of the migration training, which will exist on Pawsey's YouTube channel. And likewise, the training has embedded links back to documentation onto the specific how-tos.
Cool. So it sounds like we have a really good plan set up for our migration and training going forward from May. And I think that before then, if our researchers have any questions as well, like Chris and Anne have both mentioned, contact our help desk. We've got a really good team behind us that can help answer any questions or in preparation for your migrations as well. On that, I might throw a question to Stacey on a bit of a capital refresh update. So when we last met, we discussed that there was some global supply chain issues and logistical issues that have been occurring around the world. Do you have any updates for us since our last podcast?
Yes, I've got several updates actually, Aditi. So probably the best spot to start is Acacia. Acacia is our new long-term storage, object storage, and Acacia has gone live. We have early adopters accessing it for astronomy ingest, and in the next week or so we'll start having early adopters transferring their data from Group over to Acacia as well. Banksia is the other half of our long-term storage package, and Banksia is in the process of migration at the moment, and that will be completed towards the end of March. So that's two quite significant systems that are coming online in amongst COVID and all the challenges that that's thrown up. Setonix, as we said earlier, started acceptance testing in March. And that's progressing very well at the point in time where we're recording this podcast. Setonix Phase 2 has been hit by the worldwide shortages of various components. So we've worked with our vendor HPE, and we've actually split the delivery of Phase 2 into 2 deliveries, which we've named Phase 2A and 2B. 2A is leaving the US in May, and should be available for researchers in and around October of this year. And Phase 2A is a further 2 cabinets of CPUs, which will effectively double the capacity of Phase 1. Phase 2B is predominantly our GPU capability, and that's going to leave the US in July of this year, and we'll be working very hard to make that available to researchers early in 2023.
Cool. Thanks for that update, Stacey. It sounds like we're kind of adapting in the ever-changing world that we're in at the moment, but we're still able to hit the targets that we're trying to meet and be adaptable as well where we can. So Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that update. To kind of wrap up our podcast today, so we've covered a lot. From early May, researchers are going to be able to onboard phase 1 of Setonix, which is quite exciting to begin their migration, including moving their data across to Setonix, using the new file systems, identifying the software that they have available, and then also compiling software that they need for their research as well that may not be available on Setonix, managing their workflows with the new Slurm batch scripts, and testing and submitting jobs on their new systems as well. And of course, this is all going to be supported with extensive documentation and training that we're working on at the moment, which will be ready for you the moment you start your migration, including a sneak peek of module 1 before the migration process begins entirely. All of these resources will be available in the description of this podcast. It will also be available on Pawsey's documentation sites as well at support.pawsey.org.au. So we'll have a frequently asked questions page that will also be on our support and documentation pages, and a lot of videos and training information will be available on Pawsey's YouTube channel. It's a lot of information, so if you're a researcher or a new user at Pawsey, you're always welcome to contact our help desk, who will then pass on your queries to our expert staff. So contact help@pawsey.org.au and we'll help you in the best way that we can. On that note, the next podcast, we're going to be saying bye to Magnus. We'll have Stacey and probably Mark as our guests. So yes, join us in the next podcast to say bye to Magnus. But until then, Chris and Stacey, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Aditi.
Thank you.
Thank you.